Oje Om Yuto Sho. Let's do the 4 limitless contemplation. This gone. May all beings have happiness and create the causes of happiness. May they all be free from suffering and creating the causes of suffering. May they find that noble happiness which can never be tainted by suffering. May they attain universal impartial compassion, free of worldly bias towards friends and enemies. Sem jendamje dewatang dewe jutang den pajuchik. Dungal tang, dungal chichu tang tra wajuchik, dungal mepe dewa tampatang mindra wajuchik, nearing chaktang ni tandra we tang non chembo la ne pajuchik. So, good evening, everybody. I'm happy at least some people can come with all the load shedding going on. And Kathy, you look as though you're on a machine, you know, when you're walking. It's so funny to see you. So tonight, we're going to do stress and anxiety leaping into fearlessness. Now, please, everybody, butt in. And Stephanie, I'm happy to see you. We haven't seen you for ages. Leaping into fearlessness is a very important thing, and so is stress and anxiety. But what's really important is that you butt in at any point that you really want to say anything. It's really important for me because I think it's so important that you actually change your whole attitude towards stress and you really look at it in a completely different way. So I'm going to start with a story called The Ordinary Hero, which was a very interesting Rachel Rehrman story. And this is what she wrote about. She said, "My uncle was a hero. Like all of the men in my mother's family, he was a physician, a general practitioner, and later a pathologist. During World War II, he was caught up in an action for which he received a medal. The story went like this. My uncle was one of a group of physicians following the troops. Acting on false information, the soldiers pressed forward, believing the ridge on which they were advancing had been cleared of enemy fire. As they moved out of cover, the hidden enemy opened fire, and within seconds, the field was covered with wounded and dying men. The enemy continued to blanket the area with live fire. No one could stand upright. It was more than 12 hours before air reinforcements could cripple the enemy position. My uncle, crawling on his belly with supplies strapped to his back, placed tourniquets, stopped bleeding, took messages, sometimes written on the back of worn photographs, and gave last rites during all that time. When reinforcements came and the enemy was pulled back, it was very clear that he'd saved dozens of lives. He was decorated for this action, and his picture was on the front page of our hometown newspaper, the New York Daily Mirror. I was about 7 at the time, and with a real hero in my family, I instantly became the talk of the second grades. Best of all, he was being given leave and was coming to visit us. I was giddy with excitement, writes Rachel Rehrman. Secretly, I was surprised by these events. My uncle was short, balding, and wore glasses. He even had a little pot belly. Perhaps he would look different now, but he didn't. Always a shy man, he seemed uncomfortable with all the fuss and uneasy as neighbor after neighbor came by to shake his hand. Finally, I found my moment. Climbing into his lap, I told him how brave I thought he was and that I was sure he was never afraid of anything. Smiling, he told me this was far from the case, that he had been more frightened than ever before in his life. Severely disappointed, I blurted out, "But why did they give you a medal then?" Gently explained to me that anyone who wasn't afraid in situations like war was a fool, and they don't give medals to people for being fools. that being brave does not mean being unafraid. It means being afraid and doing it anyway. It was the first of the many teachings about courage I've received in my lifetime, and it meant a great deal to me. At the time, I was really afraid of the dark and deeply ashamed about this. But if my uncle, who was a hero, was also afraid, then perhaps there was hope for me as well. And I had been stopped by my fear, humiliated by it, wounded in my sense of self. By telling me of his anxiety, my uncle had freed me. His heroism became part of my story as well as part of his. Very important story, because we're going to look at a different thing on anxiety. And if you can give us that comic that I sent you now, that'll be very, very good. And we'll look at it. It goes like this. Please don't let me be carjacked. Please don't let terrorists bomb this building. Please don't let me breathe in too much passive smoke or eat too much cholesterol. Please don't let this convenience store be held up, shop and shoot. Please don't let me go bald and develop heart disease. And now they're looking at his RIP. He died from stress. Okay, a lovely, lovely story, because there's so many people who are so stressed. It's unbelievable, okay? And what I want to read you is a little thing that the 17th Karmapa, Ojentine Dorje, wrote about fear. He said, this true source of fear is this, the clinging to self, to identity, the clinging to our identity. He said, because I see self as something separate, something whole, something that is solid and independent, therefore, I fear losing that independent self. I fear being sick. I fear something bad happening to me. He said, this is the true source of all fear. It's a very important thing, because as soon as somebody was telling me today in a counseling session, yeah, but she said, all human beings have got identities, and we do need to protect that identity. And my answer to her was, do you? Do you? Now let's look at this very carefully, because tonight I don't really want to emphasize the over-anxious or over-stressed person, although I'm certainly willing to discuss that with you and some of the mental illnesses that result from people who are really over-anxious or over-stressed. I really want to rather talk tonight about the average person whose life has a lot of stress and anxiety, who kind of lives immersed in that stress, and anxiety, but it's kind of become a way of life, a habit. It's like there's always some kind of stress. We'll always choose something around what makes us safe and more secure. Now, there's nothing really wrong with this, I can tell you, but maybe by living around safety and security, it's restrictive to the real purpose of this incarnation. Because when we live our lives around making ourselves more secure, more safe, we're not flexible. We're cocooned in. And maybe we miss a lot of opportunities in life if we don't take that chance because of security. Now, as all of you know, when people come and see me, I'm always looking at that karmic tapestry. Just comes naturally to me. It's not that I say, now I'm going to look at your karmic tapestry. The minute somebody sits in front of me, I'm looking at their karmic tapestry. I can't help myself. And I want to always see what is repetitious, what repeats itself over and over again, okay? I want to see from childhood, what are the repetitions, and then right through their lives. And people are always trying to see that everything works out according to their preconditioned habitual ways. If not, then stress, worry, plans, maneuvering, all those things, analyzing how to get it right. This really is a waste in most cases. Because, why is it a waste? Because there are repetitious imprints that have to have a chance to be sorted through. And so the stress, anxiety provoking situations are the situations that are giving us that opportunity, open portal to unity with our true nature. So instead of fighting against those stressful situations, we are going to look at a whole different way to look at it. Because is it a question of getting rid of stress and anxiety, or is it having a different view about it, a different response to it, rather than get rid of it? Now, some people are really prone to anxiety, even over very small things. Then they always come to me and they say to me, Melanie, it's my nature. I'm always worrying about things. I'm always worrying about my children. I'm always fixing things up. I'm always putting precautionary measures in. It's my nature. I've been like this since I was a child. And my mother might have protected me because my mom was always worried I wouldn't cope. And she always checked up behind me. And then I rephrase it, because it's really important to rephrase it. I go, you mean you were born with a repetitive anxiety imprint momentum, and you were catapulted into a family that abounded in anxiety and either overprotected you and mollycoddled you and really reinforced all that stress and anxiety, or you get families that we call, in psychological terms, emotionally distant families, okay? And they throw you out of the nest and they're unable to handle things, and you get worse because you are in that situation where nobody really cares. And you make up stories all the time to try and help you to get it. But nobody ever thinks that it's so important to confront that anxiety demon, befriend it, and clear the imprint. Not find someone to protect you and handle your life for you, as a lot of people try to do. And I watch this in all the couples work that I do. I watch what happens. One's the dominant party and looks after the other one and everything. And then I've watched lots of times when the one who was the protector died. Why? Because of that imprint. Because the other one had to learn how to actually cope without the protection of somebody. Now, it's really, really, really important. And I've got a very special other Rachel Rehrman story, which I want to read, and then I'll throw it open unless anybody wants to say or ask anything. But this story is a really, really, really interesting story about a man who was really in the 4th stages of cancer and a lot of anxiety, obviously, from it. And I think it's such a special story, and I think it really illustrates the point better than I do. I'm always scared to give you lots of examples from my own case histories and things, because I always think, especially in Johannesburg, we're such a small community in a way, and people can identify even when I take away identifying information. So I like to use this story. But does anyone want to comment or say or ask? And we'll also do meditation quite soon. Anybody? Are you all okay so far? Okay. Shame Eugene's also getting bumped off, even with his new equipment. Okay. So let me tell you this story, because I think it illustrates everything I'm trying to say. It was near the beginning when Rachel Rehrman, who was a physician, actually started doing counseling. I think she did it as well as her physician work. But a doctor referred this patient, Richard, to her because he said he couldn't do anything more for the patient. Now it was just waiting until death, and he really couldn't do anything. And he thought that a few counseling sessions with her might help. So she took him on. Shortly after that, we started our sessions. Richard was a reserved man, very tall and gaunt, and he was always carefully and impeccably dressed. The clothing he wore was made to fit a much larger man he obviously once was. I was struck, as I often am, that when people are this sick, there's an iron will that keeps them going. He'd refused my offer to visit him at his home, insisting he would come into my office. And I've got the same with a lot of people who insist on coming, even though they are very sick. And later his family told her that it took him more than 2 hours to dress himself, but he refused the help, and then he would struggle with everything and get there. We did 4 or 5 sessions together in all. We talked about many things, about his symptoms and his bitterness over what had befallen him, about his feelings of isolation from the people around him, about opening communications with his family and all of that. And once or twice his family came and we all talked, and it helped. One day he came in and asked me, could I please write him a prescription? Are you in pain? I asked, my heart sinking. Had his complex regime of pain control lost its effectiveness? It was all we had. He shook his head. No, he said, I'm just very anxious all the time. I haven't been able to sleep for nights. I just lie there. Can you give me something? I said that I could and asked him if he had any idea what was causing this. You've been through so much, I told him. Why now? He had no idea. Had he been having dreams? Just the one, he told me. It was in it, a ravenous beast was pursuing him. He had not been able to see it, but had simply known that it was there. He had awakened sweating, but could not remember anything anymore. And I waited for him to continue, but he had not made a connection between the dream and what he was feeling. Perhaps we could revisit the dream, I suggested. It may help us to understand. He nodded in agreement. I suggested that he close his eyes, take a few deep breaths, and let me know when he felt ready to begin. Sorry, it's quite a long story, but it's quite important. I asked him to imagine himself back in his dream. This proved surprisingly easy for him. And in his imagination, he started to run. In the next 10 or 15 minutes, I did everything I knew to bring him into another relationship with the beast that was pursuing him, to free him of being its prey. Nothing worked. Become invisible, I suggested. It can see me. Hide behind something. It knows where I am. Talk to it. It won't answer me. As it gained on him, his anxiety grew. As it became clear they would not be able to evade the beast, I began to ask him questions about it. He still could not see it and continued to run, but gradually his answers helped him to know a great deal more about him. He told me that it was irresistible and merciless. There was no negotiating with it. It was inevitable. But, he said, it was not evil. It had been very clear. He was clear about that. In fact, to him, it seemed to be natural. After some time, I said to him, you know, Richard, you've tried everything. Maybe the only thing left for you to do is to allow it to eat you. I had expected him to object, to talk about the things he was attached to, the people he would leave behind, which were all in the beast. But he immediately moved in this direction and imagined himself being overtaken. For a while, things became intense. Richard sat with his eyes closed, weeping, sweating, and shaking so forcefully I could hear his chair rocking. He seemed far too frail for this, and I began to doubt the wisdom of this thing. But slowly, the shaking stopped, and he felt so calm. Gradually, the room began to become still, and in the stillness, I had an impression of sunlight but I knew it was almost 5 o'clock. Richard seemed completely relaxed and at peace. So was I. We sat there together for a while, and then he said softly, "There is light, only light. I am light." We sat for a while longer, and then he opened his eyes and says, "Hey, I don't feel anxious at all. That was great, doctor." The session was over and he left. I'd forgotten to give him a prescription for tranquilizers, and he hadn't reminded me. I was still kind of new to this sort of counseling. For the next 3 or 4 days, I kept thinking about this session. Intellectually, I suspected that Richard's anxiety had something to do with what Freud calls the fear of non-being. I call it the anxiety of losing one's identity. Okay, but Richard's dream experience seemed different, similar to other things I'd read about near-death experiences, things that were not yet in the medical literature at that stage. Finally, I called Richard at home and told him I'd been thinking about him. "How are you doing?" In a conversational and pleasant voice, he told me that physically he was doing much worse. He started to describe his new symptoms, yet he seemed calm about these very major physical changes. And I pointed this out to him. "Yes, I feel different," he said. "That was such a helpful session." "How are you spending your time?" I asked. "Just thinking about things." "What sort of things?" He laughed. "Crazy ideas." "Tell me one of them," I asked. And he told me, where Eugene, and he told the day before, in lying in bed, thinking about getting up, and suddenly out of the corner of his eye, he had become aware of some sort of barrier or a wall just behind him. As he noticed it, he realized he'd known it was always there, but never seen it before. I encouraged him to say more. "Well, doctor, I know I'm here on this side of it, but at the same time, I know I'm on the other side of it too. I don't know what that means. Do you?" And she said no. If he'd asked me that question, I would have said, yes, it's very clear. You are making a transition in your life. Let's do away with the barrier and make a smooth transition. So he said, "Well, I think about it a lot and it makes me feel good. It gives me that same feeling I had in your office, sort of peaceful and joyful." "That's a good feeling to have," I told him. "Yes," he said. There was silence, and very softly he started to laugh and hung up the phone. 2 or 3 days later, I heard that he had died. I like to think he died a little differently than he might have. I like to think that, but I don't know. I can still hear his laugh. Well, it's a beautiful story. Okay. Oh, there go the lights. No, this is okay. Can you all hear me? Yay, it means that it's working. It'll go on again in a minute, the lights, so don't worry about it. A very interesting story, isn't it? What do you feel about it? Before we go on, what do you feel about it? There we go. All back. And the internet remains. I'm really very, very happy about that. It's good. Anybody want to say anything? Okay, I don't mind if you're quiet, but I'm very happy if you butt in. Very, any of you, or ask or say. It's really important if you've got anything to say. I felt I needed to read that story because I feel like that's what I'm trying to teach you. Chogyam Trungpa, in his book, The Sacred Path of the Warrior, says spiritual warriors have a tradition of fearlessness. Okay? Does it mean no fear, no anxiety, no stress? Or does it mean a change of attitude? Now, when you look at that word, a leap into fearlessness, okay, the ness is the important part. It's like the difference between empty and emptiness. Emptiness means full of possibility. Fearless means without fear. Fearlessness means you can still have stress, you can still have anxiety, but it's full of possibility. It's a different thing. It's different. It's different from fearless. Lots of fathers, for example, want their sons to be fearless without fear. But fearlessness, full of possibility, means we can have anxiety, but confront it in a different way. We can even cry if it touches a certain part of us. Now, when we look at that fearlessness, it comes from knowing I'm in the right place at the right time. This is my point for tonight. The more stress you've got in your life, the more anxiety, the more difficulties, the more you are going to finish what you need to do. And I was shouting at somebody today, okay? And the thing is, I was really shouting at them today because I shout at people because sometimes they just can't hear. They can't see. They can't get it. For me, it's easy to see because I'm actually in a position where I'm viewing what is happening and I can see the repetitions. Okay. So fearlessness comes from knowing no matter how hard and stressful and anxiety provoking, we are in the right place at the right time. None of us are not in the right circumstances, although it often feels as though we aren't in the right circumstances. We are in the circumstances we need to clear our anxious imprints. We probably land in awful circumstances much more than others, and we need to be grateful for this. Fearlessness is when we accept the circumstances courageously and we allow those circumstances to touch our heart. That often brings about tears, even angry tears, even all kinds of pain tears that come to our hearts. And if you look deeply, you're in the perfect place to open your bodhicitta, your awakened heart that is there for the good of all sentient beings, okay? And appreciate that you're having this spiritual opportunity and embrace it. It's so important. It's not to only be brave. Look what happened in the story. Look what happened to Richard. If Richard hadn't have had that experience, now imagine adding that onto being able to know how to die and everything would be really, really helpful. But to have an anxiety imprint at the time of death is to pass through the portal of death with that imprint. Therefore, even we're all going to have a certain amount of fear when that moment comes. There's no doubt in my mind, okay? We can't be fearless, but we can be fearlessness. We can know what's going on. We can know this is the time when it needs to be completed, and that's okay. And we can know that with all our hearts. And Pema Chodron says this. She says, there's a teaching that says, behind all hardening and tightening and rigidity of the heart, there is always fear. But if you touch fear, behind fear, there is a soft spot. And if you touch that soft spot, where sometimes tears come, you will find the vast blue sky. You will find that which is ineffable, ungraspable, and unbiased, which can support and awaken us at any time. It's a really good quote. It really says a lot about things. And lots of people are so scared of crying, especially men, because they think, what is my image of strength? But crying is strength. It is strength. Crying is being genuine. Once we are in touch with our Buddha natures, we have intrinsic awareness that knows, and we are touched when we cry. And one of the common symptoms of stress and anxiety today is OCD. Being OCD all the time about absolutely everything. Obsessive compulsive disorder. And it can be extreme, or it can be that you're a bit of a control freak. Okay? My husband's laughing, because I said to him, I want you to listen to my teaching tonight. I said, when I teach it about the control freak, and you never believe anything I say, just hear me on this. Before we look at people who are control freaks, let's examine the main point of the talk tonight, and then we'll do a meditation. Stress, anxiety, fear, phobias, high blood pressure, heart ailments, nervousness, tensions are not caused by external circumstances. They are created and caused by our own minds. That's why different people respond to the same circumstances totally differently. So I want to come back to control freaks and really get to the root of what they are. But let's have questions, and then let's do a meditation, because I'm very happy to take this over 2 sessions, because there's a lot I want to say. I want to also say a lot about the chur practice again. I want to go back to that, which is feeding your demons and things like that. But I want you to really, really talk to me from your hearts and tell me what touches you, what you feel, and all of that. It's really important. So does anyone need to say anything? Kath, you might want to really say something.
So Mel, a couple of weeks ago, I was at London Samyuzong, and Lama Zangmo is teaching about the, I can't think of the wording of it now, but I wish I thought of what it was. I can't think of it, but it's about the things to abandon. So things to abandon or things to turn towards. And she was talking about that kind of things. So I said to her that I am often quite concerned about a recurrence of the cancer that I had. And then she told me the story that she was in the office at Samueling, and a girl came in years ago and said she's got leukemia. And Akong Rinpoche said, you're so fortunate, So, and Lama Zangma was shocked. She said, how can you say it to this girl, So it's like having the fear or the illness as your teacher with you all the time. And it's a constant reminder of impermanence. So you're literally living with the teachings and living impermanence all the time, which is why it's so fortunate. Wow. So I've been like working with that, a little bit, and, because I don't want to live in fear, but I also don't want to live in denial, because who knows,
But what about fearlessness? Isn't that a good
yes. Well, that's it. And exactly. So when you talked about fearlessness now tonight, that's exactly that, because that's how I am living. And I wasn't fearless before I had cancer, but after the treatments and after it woke my mind up, and I embraced, because cancer was always my biggest fear. And when it came true, it was like facing my absolute biggest fear. And using the teachings, and using it now as a way to live with constant impermanence, because we don't know. In England, we don't know what's going to happen with Putin. It could all be over in a second, you know. So, you know, just by living with that fearless heart, I feel like I am achieving everything I want to achieve.
So wonderful. And you see, the point being that if you have lived your life with total intrinsic awareness and awakening, let's say, okay, does it really matter whether you live to 95 or 45 or 50 or whatever? Doesn't actually make a difference, because this is a temporary, transient thing. It's like a schoolroom where you come to learn all the lessons, and when they're done, cheers, goodbye. And fearlessness, rather than stress and anxiety as the way we see it in our culture, fearlessness is really, really a very, very important concept, because it means there can be fear. And of course, if you got a diagnosis tomorrow morning, listen, you've got 5 days left to live. Yeah. Let me tell you something. I don't care who you are, you would actually feel some kind of stress and some kind of anxiety and some kind of fear. Even if you were totally prepared, it would be a lie to say you didn't. Yeah. But looking at that fear and changing it, looking at your insecurity, which is what control freaks are all about. They are insecure, but they never admit it to themselves. They always cover up by controlling everything. We'll talk about that in a moment, but let's do a meditation. Yeah. Just a beginning meditation tonight. And let's see if I can actually take you to just start opening up something in your hearts. So everybody, breathe in and breathe out. Sit in your beautiful meditation posture and just breathe in and breathe out. Now I'm going back to Dilgo Kienzi's beautiful, beautiful quote. He says, "The towns and countryside that the traveler sees through the train window do not slow down the train, nor does the train affect them. Neither disturbs the other. This is how you should see the thoughts that pass through your mind when you meditate. Like a train passing through the environment. Nothing in the environment disturbs the train, and the train doesn't disturb anything in the environment. Just breathe in and breathe out and come to this beautiful, beautiful moment. Just feel a total relaxation of the body. Go through your body, from the toes right through the body, and relax your physical body totally. Just rest the mind. Whatever is there, it's going to pass, it's going to change, it's going to dissolve. Don't touch it. No anything. Just resting the mind, resting everything. Now, just to do a little exercise for starters tonight, I want you to ask yourself the question, what is my biggest stress in life? What makes me stress the most? Name it for yourself. And examine it like a curious observer, just for a while. Does it have a color, my stress? Does it have a shape? Does it have a form? It might be the way my boss reacts to me. It might be another person in the office. It might be my mother or father, a sibling, a relative. It might be that the world state stresses me. It might be your partner. Just stand back in a purely relaxed state and view your biggest stress. Just observe it. No judgment, no interaction, just watching it. Now, you can do this on your own longer. I want you to become that stress demon. Actually imagine yourself as that stress that you created. Just sit being that stress. Feel what it's like. Explore its mindset. Feel its pain in constantly having to remind you and trip you up. Feel its insecurity when it can't win by the little voice that tells you you'll never make this. Feel what it's like when it speaks with this demeaning voice. You'll never be better. You'll never win. You'll never succeed, whatever your stress demon is. Feel its motivation. Actually feel it with your heart. You are that stress. Feel what it's like to be the stress. How hard work it is to trip you up. Now come back to being yourself and observe again until you actually feel for that little stress demon, till you feel for it, not anger, but total empathy about what it's like to keep you going, to keep you tripping up, to keep you safe. Feel that at the bottom of this demon's heart is the need to protect you and save you. And in your heart, silently acknowledge its difficult role to keep you from tripping, to keep you secure, to keep you from no harm, to keep you, to alert you. And silently make a truce inside you to work together with this stress, to accept it and to accept the two of your roles together in this life. Accept that it is there for a reason. Together you are a team working. Together you are clearing the imprints. No more running away. Feel the calm in your heart, just like when Richard allowed the beast to eat him. Oneness, it's a part of you. Feel it in your being. Allow it. Could you do it? It's a very nice exercise, just standing outside and allowing that stress to be there. And you need to do it. And Mart, in your new life, you need to do a lot of that. You really, really do. You need to do a lot of embracing everything around you. It's so important, you know.
I've done already a lot, and some wisely and some not so wisely.
That's fun. Just keep doing it.
Yeah.
Anyone want to say anything? You're all okay. Practice this. It's really important. And let's come back to the control freaks. Okay? These are people who are attached to their own power in life and only feel okay or safe when they are totally in control of all the people around them, all the circumstances around them. They suffer from insecurity, but can't let people see this and can't accept this, and instead order their whole lives or try to. They never see themselves as insecure, because seeing yourself as insecure is admitting, okay, but hide it with their power. They're all this, you know how you can tell who a control freak is? They're always uncomfortable from any form of intimacy, into me you see, of deep emotions, of closeness, in case they're exposed. So they never allow you to see into, it's always impersonal, because that's the way they keep you from, if you just look at the word intimacy, it means into me you see. And they never let you see into them. So they're tough boss,
Annie?
sitting at the top. Yes, please.
Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. You welcome.
I've got, I got married rather late in life. At 36, I got married. So I'm turning 40 next year. So when I never thought of myself as being somebody who's really a control freak until I met my mother-in-law. And she triggered and still triggers intense things, because she's a real control freak to the like umpteenth degree. But ironically enough, everything in her that triggers me is also in me.
Of course.
Because my wife says to me that, in a weird way, that the very things that I complain about her mother are things that I also tend to do.
So brilliant, John.
Yeah. And her mother, she's a absolutely brilliant businesswoman. But I just thought I'd mention it's so interesting how people are.
I love it, because that's the story of life. Yeah. People around you, even people who are opposite to you, are the mirror-like wisdom for you, because they actually show you what you are doing all the time. Okay, it's really important. But what is brilliant is, if you can see the demon in them, and then you can see the demon in you, then you can find quite a humorous way of dealing with them, instead of being aggravated with them. I'm not saying in your case, I'm just saying all round, instead of being aggravated with them, you actually deal with them with a lot of humor, which I think is so very good with people who are uptight, and people who are always stressed, and people who are always telling you what to do, just to make a joke out of it, to tell them a joke, to laugh, to actually make very light of it, but to look at what is it in me that presses my buttons from this person. It's a very interesting thing, because if you are quite a controlling, dominating kind of person, I mean, when two controlling, dominating people either come into a relationship or even come into a room, one has got to turn the volume down. So many times when I see a couple in a power struggle, what I do for them is always, I draw a board in front of them, and I put a line down. So I take a big sheet of paper and I put a line down the middle, and I put their names down. And then as the one's picking on the other, I go, score for you, and then the other one, and you'll watch that scoreboard. The one has always got to have a higher score than the other. So what happens in those relationships is every time you try and point something out to somebody, they point 3 fingers back at you rather than looking at themselves. And so one of the ways we can really deal with this is that if somebody says something to you, especially somebody who suffers from the same thing, if you can actually be very quiet and say, that's interesting that you see that in me. I really need to change it. Something which diffuses this whole power struggle that happens between you, because control freaks will resort to they can't deal with uncertainty and unpredictability. Okay, they can't deal with it in any way. So what they do when they've got unpredictable, they'll resort to any means when their control is under threat. Just take leaders like Putin, Xi Jinping, Trump, all of these kind of people. They'll use outright lies. They'll use manipulation, blaming others, killing people, getting rid of people, delusion, denial, any horrific method to keep their power, even in election fraud, when everybody knew there wasn't one. And on a smaller, lesser scale, so do individuals do that. They're always on their scoreboard. And if you point out your viewpoint, they'll point back because they can never be wrong. So the power struggle is on. And when you look at it deeply, think about it. Everything comes from insecurity. A lack of safety, a lack of security, and controlling things and others is trying to make us feel secure. And if you trace this to its root, which is what I do for a living, I trace people's insecurity to their root. Now, what's interesting is when you go to your root, you see things that happened in your childhood, being sent to boarding school, parents that didn't give you things, lack of opportunity, no money, loss, all the things that you see in your childhood. That's the origin in this life. But if you go back, then it's because we don't know who we really are. That's what our insecurity is about. We're afraid, okay? Because that particular karma, that imprint, was already there before you came into this family. Now understand that. You're in the right family, even though they seem to be the wrong family for you. But it's the right family because it's there. You could work out the unresolved imprints. So if you look at all the insecurities, traumas, etc. in childhood, those come because of what you had before, because of what you did before, that catapults you into the same situation. I always remember a situation of having somebody, and it was so many years ago that I really can tell the story, because this girl had, she really had a traumatic childhood, and she remembered her father abusing her sexually at 6 months old. Okay, at 6 months old. But she had that particular memory, okay? And one day, I'll never forget this story. One day, and she told me this story, one day, she was sitting and she had this vision or this dream in which you know, she was going through the trauma of her childhood, and suddenly she saw herself on a boat with a whip, and she was a slave driver whipping the slaves on the boat. And as the one slave turned around, she says she recognized him as her father. I mean, it's an uncanny story and almost seems too far-fetched, but what a story. You know, a memory of why she got catapulted to this particular father who abused her at 6 months old, and that she had a memory of that. So what I'm saying is that the reason for the insecurity, the real reason, is because we don't know who we really are. We're afraid. Our separate dualistic identity has got to be preserved at all costs. So people tell me, this can never happen to me again. I had no money, Melanie, in childhood, and we were absolutely poverty-stricken. And so I refuse to let that happen to me now. I will do anything to keep the money going, okay? I will not let that happen to me again. But basically, that's a ridiculous motivation. You can sure try and make money, but don't make that your goal because you were poor as a child, because then you haven't resolved. The stress is there and you haven't resolved it in any way. And then at death, the separate identity dissolves and we're left clinging. And I was just struck by a comment that Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche was telling a large group of people. He said, Buddhism is never taught to make you comfortable. Isn't that interesting? Buddhism is never taught to make you comfortable. It's taught to teach you your true identity. And if you accept that there is another identity other than this that you see before you, then you're on the right road. And the stress and anxiety will definitely not get to you. It may still be there, but it won't get to you like that in any way or any form. And yesterday morning, I had this very, very deep dream experience. Okay, it was short, and I unfortunately, my alarm went off and woke me out of the dream. So I never got to see the end of this dream. But what happened in this dream was there was this whole community of people. And I had bought clay. I'd bought clay that I had brought into the room. And in the middle of everything, in walked Akong Rinpoche, Kathy Martin. In walked Akong Rinpoche. He still looked the same, although I know he doesn't look the same in this new life that he's in. But in walked Akong Rinpoche. And I'm sure he's going to be a lot more wordy in this lifetime, but he was like he was in the last lifetime. And he just took the clay and he started to build this clay in my dream. He took the clay, he rolled it, and he made it into a very big kind of circle or whatever it was. And then he started to create from the clay figures and all sorts of things. And I knew when he was doing it, I knew that he was doing some kind of mandala building with this clay. And so even though I didn't see the end of the dream, I knew that everybody would come around him and he would very soon start to paint the mandala in all different colors, and you would be attracted. He would actually get all the individuals in the room to start building out of the clay their own figures and their own colors and their own everything. That's what I knew, but I didn't see the end of the dream because I had to get up. But I wondered why he gave me that dream yesterday morning, or why I had that dream yesterday morning. And I thought, no, the dream is very appropriate for tonight, not for yesterday morning. It could have also been for yesterday morning. But when I looked at it here, I thought to myself, as a community, as a mandala, as a lineage, we all have the ability to heal and to grow and to put our stamps in and put our colors in and create wonderful, wonderful things. And I just thought it was an amazing dream, and it was an amazing thought that was in my mind. It was an amazing creation, because I thought, you know, it's so interesting that different lamas and different teachers will do different things to shock us, to take us out of our comfort zone, or to heal us, or to put us together, that all these earthly circumstances don't make one iota of difference. Doesn't matter what we're going through, whatever we're going through, it's absolutely fine. Because I know Chogyam Trungpa threw his students out of the nest. He would teach them a practice. As soon as they got used to the practice and got comfortable, he changed the practice. He changed the circumstances. He made them get up at 12 o'clock at night. He would go on their doors, knock on their doors, pull them out, take them to the top of a mountain when they didn't know what was going on, because he didn't want them to get attached to anything that is only a playing out of the essence. And if you look at all your stress and you look at everything in your life, it's just a temporary, transient playing out of another drama and another drama and another drama. That's all. What are you thinking, Viam? I can see that head's going second to none. Hello, Eric. Eric, you missed all the beginning and the introduction and everything. You'll have to get there. Go on, Viam. What's going on with you?
I'm just reflecting. No, it's. I love listening to all this stuff. I'm just thinking about my life and like the roles of, you know, the family that you're born in, and I guess as you're getting a little bit older, like starting to, and in Buddhism, like detach a bit, you know, detach more from this idea of, you know, the family or the nationality or the this and all these things, that all these big labels that you just get, you know, brought up with. Like you can't defy that ideology or these ideas, you know. Yeah, just thinking about that and feeling at ease, you know, that it's going along. And like just your talk, all these narratives that the mind can talk about, the anxiety or the fear, and there's definitely that habit there around it, you know. Like if I give it too much time, it's like it takes me, you know, it becomes like then you're in the washing machine. But if you actually just take that bigger picture view, then I'm like, what's going on here? Like it's not such a big deal. Like this narrative makes it to be such a huge deal, you know. But it's like if I remind myself every time, I found the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, like the, you know, Buddhist teachings, and just on the spot, if I make one little step forward in this life, like it's much better than anything this narrative can tell me that I need to do.
Exactly. And what you're saying is so important, because if you can change that whole narrative, you know, you just think about it culturally. Don't some of you go to a country and you think to yourself, I feel so at home in this country, you know, like you feel so fine in that particular culture and not fine in that culture. Like I love Asian culture. It really, really appeals to me, Asian culture. I love it when they bow to each other. I know that it's been cruelly mishandled now in later years, but I love Asian culture. I like that gentle, how let's say it was before. I think it's changing now. But I mean, Dzongkso Rinpoche, I watch him teaching in all kinds of different countries and different cultures and different circumstances. And then he adapts the teaching, because he says, you know, it's got to be adapted. When you're listening to the teaching, you do it with your culture, with your everything that you've got. And so it's really important to be able to teach something. Like I was listening to something he was giving, I think it was in a German Buddhist center, Martin. And then they did their prayers in the beginning, and it was all in English and with bodhicitta and with everything. And I thought to myself, it's so strange. Look at it with the prayers we do. You know, we adapt everything. Some of the Tibetan culture we can take, some of it we can't. But the one thing I do know is that in Tibetan culture, they do not have stress. Not like we have it. In the Western culture, we are exposed to so much stress and so much anxiety. And what we've got to really develop is this fearlessness. I want to next week do a whole lot of other things that I want to do, because Taisitu Rinpoche said in this age, we've advanced in areas like technology, medicine, science. He says we may soon call a friend on Mars, yet there is more suicide than any other time. And he asks the question, why? Okay. And I want to talk about this suicide as well. I don't want to do it tonight. I don't want to overburden you with all the things I'm saying. But if you look at suicide, the whole thing behind it is anxiety and stress. And again, I heard Dzongkar Khyentse Rinpoche saying that suicide usually is a habit momentum over lifetimes. I was shocked because I know very often when I have somebody sitting in front of me and they tell me they want to commit suicide, I know that there is a bit of a momentum, that maybe they've done it before, but I never looked at it, that they may do it in many, many incarnations, so that it's now become quite a habit momentum. Too much stress, too much anxiety, opt out of life. And maybe it becomes easier to do that as you go along. But what's the point of doing it? If you are stressed and anxious and full of fear and full of phobias in your physical body, you're going to be 20 times, 30 times worse without the physical body. So what do people think? Do they think that when you kill yourself and you leave all the chaos behind you for the people that are left behind, that you're going to go on to cloud 9 with an angel serenading you and peacefully stroking you to feel better? I mean, it means you've missed the point completely.
Well,
Please.
can I tell just a short little story about this kind of, the narrative tells you like you need to, the word that came up for me when you spoke about the Western society with all the kind of stress versus the Tibetan side is like this strife, like this endless, got to be there, got to reach this. And I used to like in kind of 10 years ago, so I started to bring artists out from America to come tour in South Africa, and these guys were like the best musicians. And I thought to myself, like, this guy's music is so, like, when I listen to it, I have this experience. Surely he must have some realization about life, just like you can hear it in his music. And I met these guys, and they were not happy with their own music. They thought it sounded shit. Like, sorry for the word. That's like literally what they told me. They're like, like they were disgruntled. They were like kind of like not happy with life. I was like, how can this be? I thought like you've got like everything that a young and aspiring musician would think, like, and then I just started to realize, like, it's not the full picture,
Yeah. Not the full picture.
Yeah.
And I think we are attached to all of that. And I also want to talk next time about alcohol, drugs, and a lot about food, because I think food addictions are also really stress addictions. And I think that those things I really also want to talk about. But I think it's so important to really understand these things and how the Chur practice comes about. And it's all about feeding the demons. And the demons are all internal, not external, although they appear before us in external form. Anyway, I think it's enough for tonight. Does anybody want to ask a question, say anything, and we can continue this? I've got a lot of lovely teaching here, and I think we can continue this next time. But anybody else want to say anything? Are you all quite comfortable? Layla, Lindsay, Marcel, Eugene, Molly, Terry, Zelda. Please, Layla.
No, I'm very happy.
Okay.
Just made me think of my fears about and my attachments. Like, I love my house. I don't want to leave my house. But I mean, it's just a material thing. In the meantime, I'm worried about my mom on the other side of the planet, and I really should be with her. So it's like, yeah, I mean, you can do it. So yeah, it just kind of helped me, force me out of that stuck place where, maybe you can. Why is the house holding you down?
Yeah, but you know what? Go deeply down, because if you look at South Africa particularly, it's so unnatural that we all separated from our kids, that our kids go, it's kind of much more here than in any other countries. It's really, from here that everybody immigrates and we all separated. And I can understand exactly what you're saying. I mean, I love my place, I love my house, I love all of those things, but maybe I should be looking after my mom or be there with her or whatever the case is. And I can really understand that, but bring that up and view it in the way I was saying, because maybe there's a certain amount of guilt there, maybe there's a certain amount of pain there, maybe there are lots of things that you need to be learning from it. I think that the point of this teaching, and I also want to talk a lot about the cortisol that Tupton spoke about, which is the flight reaction from the amygdala of the brain, which is when you get adrenaline, and the oxytocin, which you get from meditation, and how we can actually bring more oxytocin into our lives by meditating, which also helps us to get a good balance when we're looking at all these things. Your things are no different to anyone else's. It's just that how you approach it. Let's say you did approach that feeling of stress about being separated from your mom. I think that's a very important feeling and not demon, but feeling to look at and see what lies beneath it, explore it, open it up, come to terms with it. It's really important that we don't carry these things over when we die. So I think what you're saying is really, really important. I think all of you have got a lot of things, and really think about this. There's a lot of other things I really do want to talk about, but I'm not going to do it till 9 o'clock. Let's stop, everybody. You're Mart.
Well, what you just said, I think that's something I'm sometimes not quite clear on. Maybe you can elaborate on that, and maybe next time. But you just said, look, let's look deeper, and let's look deeper. And at the same time, we have a lot of meditation teachings, and what you also read earlier from Diego Chienzi is like, remain in an observing role. So don't necessarily drill into every single thing, analyze, overanalyze, think again, and all that. But I think for me, it's more like the observation, and then when I feel adversity or something like that, then just allowing it. But twice now you somehow also mentioned a little bit of what I would call analyzing, and how that goes together, that I'm sometimes not very clear on.
No, because what I'm really talking about is that sometimes you've got an issue that is really causes a lot of stress for you. And I have a lot of people approaching me like, I've got this issue and it really is causing me anxiety and things like that. Now, you can't say there's nothing there forget about it, let it dissolve. I think for me, it's really important when you've got an issue that keeps cropping up and causes you a lot of anxiety and pain and stress. I think it's really important that it's not analytical. The observation is not analytical. The analytical is more, this is what I've got to do with it, okay? Whereas the observation and allowing it to be is, it will take care of itself, but right now it's really a big issue in my mind, and I'm going to just allow it full force, but not, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is there ever a way that you can stop, let's say, a feeling that your mother lives in another country and you live here and you feel a lot of stress and pain about it? Is there really a way to stop that? No, there's not a way to stop that, but there's a way to look deeply at it and realize that what's happened in that separation is very important for all your growth, and to allow it to be. And to also sometimes allow yourself those tears. That's what I think the bodhicitta is about. That when people have got really hard things, that you can cry about it, and that somebody else can listen, and that it dissolves very, very quickly. I think that's very important, rather than picking at it, nitpicking at it, working it out, making a plan what you're going to do. Just allowing it, and allowing that mirror back into yourself to see what you need to do. I think that's really important. So let's dedicate tonight to all the people that are in fear right through. I mean, I looked at that Sudan today, and it really looked horrible, this whole war and people desperately trying to get out. So tonight we dedicate all these teachings to all the people in the world that are really under a lot of stress and pain and anxiety, and believe it to be something tangible. We dedicate to all those people. Through this merit, may we achieve all-seeing Buddhahood, and thereafter, once all harmful enemies have been defeated, may all beings be liberated from the ocean of existence, stirred by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Sonam die tamche zipane topne nepe dranam pamshene jeganachi balak dropaye sipe sole doa dro warsho. We just take that off. If anybody wants to say anything.